Episode of Adbits is supported by 2.0 Film. We service commercial productions across Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Northern Italy, and Austria, offering fast turnarounds, top-tier crews, and some of the most flexible production environments in Europe. Today's guest sits at the other end of the creative pipeline. Noel Hedges has spent over 2 decades inside the global TV business, working across acquisitions, co-productions, and international financing at companies including BBC, ITV, Granada, Shine, Cineflex, DRG, and most recently Lionsgate, where he was the Executive Vice President of International TV Acquisitions and Co-Productions. He has been involved in shows like The Newsreader, Family Law, Broadchurch, Humans, and many others that went on to travel the world. In this conversation, we look at how TV really gets made, how deals actually come together, how streamers have changed the economics, and where the worlds of television, brands, and advertising are starting to overlap. So just to get a bit, welcome, Noel. Of course,
hello.
Welcome, hello. Just getting started in sort of your origin story, how it all began. So how did you first get into acquisitions and co-productions?
Well, I think it's more a question of like how I got into TV, because it sort of overlaps into the wider thinking for me. I initially have always been interested and always been a fan of film, and predominantly that was my kind of passion, was I want to work in film, and I had lots of posters on my wall and all that as a kid. But there wasn't really, I'm not sort of one of the lucky few who lives. I didn't live down south. I lived up north in the northwest of England. There weren't massive opportunities for film sort of careers. You could argue there still aren't. But then, when we were talking sort of early 90s, like mid 90s, there weren't opportunities without having to expensively decamp down to London. So the film was kind of out. There was a large amount of television production in the northwest of England, predominantly around Manchester, who were making hours and hours of award-winning television. But I didn't want to kind of, I never had the attitude of wanting to work in production. I didn't, I just didn't want to get my hands dirty that way. I always thought I want to work with them after they've been made, and I didn't know that was called distribution, but I was like, there must be something. Like, they obviously get shown in cinemas, and there's things, I want to do that, use them as products, and use them in their entirety. And then I went for an interview at Granada for like a rights assistant job. And they said, oh yeah, well, that's distribution, and rights is the actual kind of underpinning of all sort of distribution. And so I got into TV through that door, through working rights at Granada, and then moved over to the BBC acquisitions, into program acquisitions for the channel. So that was the department that were buying television, all the TV shows that The Simpsons and all that. But that was the department that was buying that. And from that, a job came up at Carlton, which was one of the ITV sort of franchise holders. That was for a salesperson to handle Scandinavia. And so I made the flip from being like a business affairs exec at BBC Acquisitions into being a salesperson for Carlton. So I'll make this very brief. I was a salesperson for a very long time. I was probably a salesperson for about 10 to 15 years, selling television programs like Inspector Morse and Touch of Frost and all that sort of thing into Scandinavia, Germany, Europe generally. And then it quickly became, I was getting more intrigued, and I was more interested in, like, I used to read all the scripts, and I used to really kind of want to understand what was coming and like what the pipeline was looking at. I enjoyed the deal of selling. I enjoyed closing a deal, and there's something very sort of satisfying when you do a deal on a show and how you do it. But I was always more interested in where it was coming from and who the people are making it. So then I made the flip to taking care of all the incoming programming that we were going to be selling. So all our relationships with producers, both in-house and independent, doing those deals with them so we could represent the show, and sort of that there's like a financial deal that's done. And I became the head of drama at Granada International, and that got me into acquisitions for the last sort of 10, 15 years on that side. So it's really kind of, I've always been in the world of rights, and I've always been in the world of international distribution. It's always been content, but content as it's how it can be exploited around the world, not just getting, it's not about the commission in the UK at first, it's about like, how can we make money out of this internationally?
That's so interesting. That's really interesting. So was there, I mean, you sort of talked about it in a way, because it was always there seemingly, but was there an early moment when you realized this side of the business was where you belonged? I mean, you sort of mentioned that did you always know?
I've never thought about doing anything else, so I must have done. I don't actively think I always knew. I think there's an element that sort of feels like I landed here, but there was clearly a subconscious intent for this to be, this was the thing. I think I can't do a job unless I really enjoy the fundamental product that's being dealt with, whether that's
I know
abstract,
you mean,
whether it's an abstract product or whether it's a real product. It's just that. So, and I think, well, I only really like film and television, to be honest. So, like, let's, creative products. It could be audio or something. But so it was, and then when I landed at Carlton and I saw this world that at the time, I still don't think many people know about it now, but like at the time, it was this little quite secret little business that was making a lot of money, but all these shows were getting sold around the world, and the production companies owned the rights to those programs and were making money out of them, and the salespeople were having, to me, I looked at it and thought, God, you're having a really nice time doing this, aren't you? You're traveling around the world, you're going to MidCon. I remember, I was in my 20s, I think, mid to late 20s, and I was like,
fun.
Having a good time was quite important, so, and I'm thinking, we get to go to Cannes twice a year, and you get to go to like Monte Carlo, and it's all quite fun. There's lots of lunch. It was just the tail end of like the long lunch sort of society. So it was great to work with the content and not be getting your hands dirty. But equally, I was meeting all these fantastic people from all these broadcasters around the world and forming these really kind of, it's not a transactional business, the sales and distribution relationship. It's deep, probably like in the ad world, so in some levels of deep relationships that you form with the buyers at the channels and the relationships you have with the producers of the shows you represent. They're pretty deep. They're not just here today, gone tomorrow. So you build these almost quasi friendships where you have to be quite careful with, because you think they're your friends, and it's a business relationship ultimately, but it's all sort of wrapped up in a really kind of sort of collaborative, sort of symbiotic sort of whole that I just thought, this is good. This is where I should be. This is like good, creative and commercial.
It sounds like a very good reason. All the things you mentioned.
Well, just to get pissed. Yeah, that's the reason.
It's just, I think one of the things that resonated immediately with me was that you've got to do something that you enjoy. You can't just flog, especially if you're in sales or in that part of the market, you've got to be selling something you enjoy, you can deal with. It's impossible not to do something. You can't not do that. It's basically,
especially to deal with the challenges. Because believe you me, when I first started selling, I didn't have a clue. You sort of wrote. I knew the shape of the deals and stuff, but I'd never sold anything in my life, so that was a huge learning curve. But because it was based around programs I liked and films that I was familiar with, it made the whole thing. You'd rely on that to push you through in the sales process, and I think there is selling involved in distribution. It's perhaps not as hard sell as like selling ad space or selling a car or something like that, because obviously there's a creative decision ultimately from the other person whether they want it or not. But there's deal making, and there is subtle sort of soft sales going on that is quite useful, I would say.
That's great. I mean, so next I'm going to ask, what did work? I mean, you've worked at some amazing places. What did working at places like the BBC, ITV, and Granada teach you that still shapes how you operate today, or have we moved on so much that the world has completely changed?
Well, ITV and Granada are sort of the same thing. We don't really talk about Granada anymore, but Granada sort of was part of ITV. But has it? I don't think it's changed that. The world has changed, and there's lots of things you can point to that are different. But those companies still exist, and those companies still operate in the same way. They still take programming in the same way, and they still sell it in the same way. I don't know. It's sort of one of the common denominators for me looking at those companies is kind of the value of British content. It was something that I've sold all sorts of different programming from all over the world, but starting in British drama, British documentary, and just understanding how important that is for a lot of places around the world and how much of it is seen. It might not get shouted about, and it might not be on the cover of their local listings magazines or digital versions thereof now, but it is still immensely, like, culturally really powerful for us. And it's sort of, so that stayed with me for sure. I don't think it's necessarily something that I learned there, that obviously I sort of built my career in these companies and learned a lot of the skills I still use today, but just that fundamental, like, respect for the quality of production in this country, and the writing and just the production quality is really high. So that's probably one thing that I would say stayed with me.
I love that. So that's a great answer, and it reminds you how good we are at making content. I find it's same in advertising. It's it's easy. It sounds silly when it comes out of your mouth, but we just make the best stuff. The quality level is exceptionally high, and so are the teams and everyone who works in it. It's great. It's really lovely to hear in the TV side.
We're incredibly bold. Well, there's lots of discussion over like what's going on in the world creatively and TV, but the ideas are bold, and the talent on and off screen is strong, and it's really rooted in a storytelling, and it's just we do underestimate. I think you can get distracted by a lot of sort of negativity about, oh, there's so much, all the stuff's the same on TV these days and stuff, but it's not. When you look deeply, it's not. It's still really good quality.
Yeah, that's excellent. All right, great. And so now for the next one, it's really to explain. I noticed your sister put a post on about you today, actually on LinkedIn, which I thought was great. And what was interesting about it, she goes, "You never know what your sibling really does. Does anyone really know?" And I think that's such a truism. So this section really is about sort of for you to explain for people. So here we go. For people outside the industry, how do you explain acquisitions and co-productions, just in simple terms, so people absolutely clarify it?
Okay, from a programming, like a distribution point of view, my job was it's the inflow of the products that we have. Our sales team are selling the catalog, they're selling our new slate of programs that we have rights and control. Whereas my job was to deal with everything that's coming in that wasn't quite ready to be sold yet, but finding material, finding inventory to sell. If you think of it like like real estate, like it's housing, the property market. It's someone going out and signing up a lot of houses to sell. That's crudely put, but it's the inflow of the content. Now that it's not as straightforward as just going around and going, right, I'll have that. There's a lot of evaluation, creative and commercial. There's a lot of financial analysis. There's a deal that's done. Most of the time, your distributors are investing in the content as part of the overall production budget, which we'll probably get onto. But and you've got to decide whether or not you think you can sell it, whether there's an audience for it around the world, whether there are buyers for it around the world, how much that's going to raise. Is it suitable for your company? It might not be the right sort of slate you have that this content will not necessarily fit into. And And that's kind of the acquisition is kind of a program. When you say acquisition, it's a program that's kind of already formed but not produced, that you're going to pick up. You haven't developed it. You haven't taken the risk of. You're not taking the risk of production, but you're getting involved at the latter stages of, let's say, development. Now, co-production is a little bit one step before that, but it's the same principle of getting content to sell and building your slate, that we'd look for opportunities that maybe are really early and financially need more help. They might need more investment, and it might call for not just a little advance from a distribution company. It might call for us to go and find another partner for it, another broadcaster to get on board. It might be a company, a distributor takes a huge risk to do it, just to get involved, but it becomes, from a commercial deal perspective, it's a different type of deal, in terms of the value you can get out of it. You're invested in it more, so you'll get more of the value of a co-production. So it's a bit, and they're a bit more long-term as well. So I'd say acquisition it's inflow, but it's sort of keeping your slate going on an active basis. So your shows will be coming in, let's say 6 to 12 months. Co-production, the same principle, but possibly a longer term strategy about building your slate out with more distance. But ultimately, it's about bringing content in.
Okay, great.
That make any sense at all? Because
that makes loads of sense, and it was really well put. So you did well. And so now
you can see why Alex just never understands what I'm.
Well, it's exactly. I know. It when you think about it, it makes complete sense. Though. Yeah. I think from outsiders' perspectives, it's just once you get your head, it's one of those things you need to get your head around, and then
it's understanding. It's the financial dynamics of how these things are made really dictate. Once you know where the money comes from, you go, okay, yeah, there's people that deal with that bit and that bit and that bit.
This is perfect, because the next question was, what does a modern finance plan for a scripted drama actually look like now?
It can look in terms of different ways, really, but crudely put, there is a commissioner. So a broadcaster or a buyer. So that could be, say it's the BBC or ITV, or it could be a streamer. Things have changed in terms of there are different models now, but let's just stick to linear television for the moment, because that's more relevant to what I've been doing. You'll have a broadcaster. They will give a license fee against certain rights in their territory, in the UK. Then there will be some sort of tax credit. So in the UK, you'd get the high-end TV tax credit if something is over the threshold. That will be in the finance plan, or it might not be in the UK. It might be in Ireland. You know all about this. It might be in South Africa. But your local incentive, your tax credit, your soft money. Then traditionally, it used to be. Then it was just the distributor advance, an advance against the sales we think we could make. No guarantee. That's the risk we would be taking, but that's and that kind of used to be able to do it, but it doesn't anymore. So now there's the gap is much bigger, and often there is another line for a pre-sale in, or maybe there's another incentive from another from a government agency, or there's some subsidy somewhere. But roughly speaking, that it kind of is broken down in that way. Or it could look like a streamer just coming in and funding the whole thing. But that is a kind of that's like a buyout situation. So they come in, they fund the whole thing, they control the whole thing, and there's no distribution from a traditional sense, in my sense. But then there are hybrids of those two things. There are streamers out there that don't take the whole world and want to do a more territory specific type of deal, which then would revert the model to being the former that I talked about. So that's kind of the rough sketch anyway.
Okay, and then our next one is again leading on from just what you spoke to. How have streamers changed the economics of long form TV? I think you just sort of touched on it. They're doing their own deals completely. There's no distribution, obviously, in a lot of instances, because, as you said, as we know, they are their own distribution service, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they've changed things massively, and we've been through it. And obviously, we had a peak, and it kind of has burst. That peak's kind of been reached, and they gave a lot of options in a positive sense. They've given huge amounts of options. If you've got a great piece of development and a great piece of IP, then you've got options where you take it. There are certain budgets over which only a streamer could get involved if they want it, because there's no way of financing a really ambitious, high concept production without them being involved. So other people would argue prices have gone up across the board because there's more competition now and more production is coming to the UK because the streamers are in the UK physically producing here, which has caused a lot of production costs to go up. So I think they've given producers more options. I'm not saying that's made it any easier. Things are harder, aren't they, for everybody at the moment? But in terms of economics, there are at least options to go and find the money. In terms of strategizing at your initial stage of where you're going to take something, you can think about your port of call and the dynamics of each sort of place. So yeah, in that respect, it has changed a lot. And distribution it's not relevant in every scenario, but certainly in a strategic sense at the beginning, it is important because you need to weigh up the options about value before you go out and start pitching.
Okay. And what are the biggest misconceptions producers have about how deals are put together? Are there loads, or is there stuff that just stands out every time that you find with a less seasoned producer?
You know what I think a lot of producers think? They think that when it's just because something's successful on Netflix, for example, that it's going to sell really well internationally. Like we've had lots of examples about things that suddenly become just seem to blow up because they've been put on Netflix and everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily track when you're trying to sell something territory by territory. There's a weird anomaly. It's obviously Netflix deal in niches. They can get in they can attract people who really like certain types of things and go to them for that genre. Whereas, the international sales market can be a little bit more, let's say, conservative taste-wise. So you're probably selling a lot more, accessible genres, thrillers and detective shows and kind of broader content. So I think I get a lot of, but it's done really well on Netflix. It's like, well, if you want, that doesn't equate with this. You can't balance that out with what it would then be valuable, how valuable it would be on the international market. It's they're different landscapes with their own sort of dynamics. So yeah, it is. And it's hard to pin down really, but it's when someone says about sci-fi, which is really hard to sell territory by territory. It's not. And they say, well, Stranger Things is really big, and Fallout's really big, and it's like, yeah, but it's on a global platform that they operate in a different way. That's not what buyers at individual TV channels they're generally trying to achieve the biggest audience as possible for what they buy, and they're not operating in niche genres. They're operating in broad genres.
That makes total sense.
So yeah, it can often be a discussion anyway, but it's in a way it's good because it's still, whenever you see these niches, whether it's period or sci-fi or westerns or whatever, when you see them working on whatever platform, it is good to see variety being thrown up, because it gives you hope that you will be able to sell these things ultimately, and think trends will emerge from it. So
yeah, you see there's a market there, so it gives some credibility to rather than it's purely speculative.
Yeah, and it's not just about, and it gives you some argument to try and sort of persuade buyers on.
Yeah. So in 2025, what actually makes or made a project bankable?
Or in 2025, 2026 now, I suppose. Let's
You're
talk about
2026
today.
now, but I was just thinking like last, just talking
Yeah.
about last year. Was there a last year, and is there already a change for this year? That for people who don't know.
No, I would. I mean, not yet. I don't think we're still. I mean, I think we're still in a world where safety is kind of, and I mean like safety and reliability of content, rather than personal safety. So, like, what makes a project bankable? Talent. If you've got talent in it, then it's these are obvious things. If you've got talent in your show, it will allow the audience and the buyer first, and then the audience, to have greater confidence in clicking onto that program to watch it, because they think, oh, I like that person, or I know that person, so it's going to be good. That's the kind of instant. And I think things are ultimately broader is better at the moment. There was a time 4-5 years ago where we were kind of at the top of that peak TV. Everyone was trying lots of different genres. Everyone was really going edgy. Everyone was being quite sort of experimental. Whereas I think everything's reverted now, and it's more sort of broader appeal, things that are appealing to bigger audiences, more broader general audiences. Doesn't mean they have to be soft, but I sort of think of what's going on with that heated rivalry show, the ice hockey show. It's obviously it's a LGBTQ plus sort of story, but it's told in a very broad sort of romance kind of way. And there's also things like The Hunting Wives and all that sort of thing. They're broader. They're appealing to kind of sort of broad audience more than anything. And I think that's where it's a better space than trying to hit the niche audience, because they're not going to linear television, the niche audience. They generally seek what they want to find themselves, wherever they can find it from. So I'd say that if you really want to be more clued up to actually getting something sold well, it's named talent and a nice broad concept. Okay. But in broad but interesting, obviously. It's still got to be interesting and well done.
So, so moving on from that area, or how TV really gets made, moving more into spotting hits early. So this is what everyone's waiting for, obviously, Noel. So on that point, what did you see early, for example, in the newsreader that made you lean in? Maybe you want to explain a little bit about the newsreader itself for people who don't know.
Yeah, if you don't know, this is an Australian drama series that ran for 3 seasons. It was on ABC in Australia, the public broadcaster, and it was on the BBC here, and season 3 just on currently. I think it's on iPlayer right now. Set in a 1980s newsroom, and about the relationship between a male rookie newsreader and a kind of the experienced female sort of journalist presenter. I enjoyed it. Fundamentally, it started there. I read it. I met the producer in Australia, and she sent me the scripts. It sounded intriguing to me, and I read it, and I really enjoyed it. I whipped through the scripts, and I think that's always a great start. If you're whipping through the scripts, going, "Oh, I want to read the next one. I want to read the next one," you sort of go, "Oh, this is good." That doesn't mean
when you get a good book, and you're just sort of in it, and you can't stop reading it, and then you come out. It's a very similar experience.
Yeah, but it's also to do with how it's structured, like how it's being pieced together, and the pace of the thing is not like it felt commercial in its structure. It wasn't difficult to engage with. So that was my gut feeling. That doesn't mean I was in, because you start layering on, hang on a minute, it's 1980s. Well, who's making it? I don't know them. Who's going to be in it? It's set in the 1980s. It's Australian. It's got, it's a world that, who cares about that? Excuse me. But sorry, coughing bit. But ultimately, we got it through, and we weren't like, the investment was reasonable, but it wasn't overly risky first season, and it was a huge hit for us. It sold everywhere because it was. I think everybody loved it, both who worked on it, who was in it, and who worked on it, and they put all their creativity into making a show that really resonated and really was taken care of. You could see it. I was so nervous.
Yeah,
I was so nervous about it because I did get a certain amount of sort of, why are we doing this for? You know, all the obvious reasons. It does not fit in a world of detective, you know, and sort of murder mystery. But it was so well written. Now, so I was so nervous. But then I saw the first rushes of when one of the first scenes was there's a scene at the beginning where he's just his first presenter piece to camera, and he's a disaster and he falls apart, and they showed me that, and it was the styling, the way they styled it, the way he was performing it. I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. You know, this is perfect, you know. Yeah. So it was, thankfully, and that was a huge sigh of relief. And then sort of that gave me a huge bit of confidence to think, well, you know what, the program's good. Now it's up to our salespeople to sell it as best they can and really convince, you know, and all the supporting stuff. You want good reviews and you want good ratings and all that sort of thing, and that helps. But you know, I think there is a gut instinct, and even when it's things that are obviously commercial, like a murder mystery or a detective show, you get a gut feel for how original something is and how it stands against what is already out there, and is it going to be meaningful? And it comes from knowing the landscape and knowing what has been produced. And you know, sometimes you do think, oh, I know that'll do well because I know there are buyers for it immediately because they like crime fiction or something, or it might just be this writer is really great and they'll want to work. We know the next X project is going to be sort of eaten up by buyers. So you know, it's not just gut instinct. In fact, you know, gut instinct's one thing. There's a lot of analysis that gets done, you know, and it's sort of, and there's a lot of voices. It's not just my voice. It's the voice of the sales team. It's the voice of the management. It's like everybody pitches in with a view to, is this worth the risk?
That's great. So it's amazing how much is going on in the background that people just don't think about. They see a show, they see it going out, and they just don't realize the dynamics that have gone.
But it's the same at a broadcaster though. You know, like, you know, the commissioner commissions a TV show. The head of drama at the BBC will be commissioning. That will be her. She'll be she or they will be championing that program internally, but it won't just be their call. That will go through layers and layers of analysis and deliberation and discussion, and fear and trepidation and all that sort of thing.
Yes,
you know, sort of
imagine.
So there is
the journey.
Yeah, and it's the same. Whilst we're not commissioning, we're relying on somebody else to make the program, or we're putting our trust into people to make it well. This is still the same analysis. You know, the money is being spent from our bank account or the bank account of the company. So it has to be justified and thoroughly, sort of rigorously analysed.
Yeah, the most you can do. Okay, so and from your experience, why do some shows travel internationally while others never quite land?
Oh God, that's a mix of things. It could be creative. It could be that the show didn't end up being what it was hoped to be. The timing could be off. You know, some things don't work on broadcast here when they are, you know, in theory are so good.
The some shows are. Would you say there's always these other elements, but are some shows so good that they just land everywhere, or is that not the case really at all? Sometimes you've seen it, the fantastic shows here and there, and they just don't land for the reasons you just mentioned, for example. Or is that not the case?
No, I think it is. There are shows out there that here we would watch and go, oh my God, that's brilliant. But then you go, yeah, but I can't sell it in Germany, or I can't sell it in Sweden, or I can't sell it, you know, nobody wants it in Japan, or, you know, sort of. They
look at you like you're mad. Like, this is terrible.
Yeah. It's like there are some shows that, you know, that, you know, a lot of things do. I don't think has there been one thing that isn't like a 7th season of a successful show, like a brand new program that just goes everywhere all at once. It doesn't happen. Things take, you know, not just because of the timing and the phasing of how these deals were, but just you know, a lot of the time, some bigger broadcasters take their time. You know, they don't need things straight away, so they'll wait and see how things perform. But to really understand who's been watching the program, to see if it fits their audience. Then there's a whole layer of like doing a deal, and it's sort of not just, generally speaking, most distributors don't just do deals on one program. You know, if they're big companies, they, you know, they've got multiple shows out there at the same time. So there's you know, there's sophisticated deals. You know, so it you know, it's not always it's not just a one-by-one transaction. So they need to be, you know, so that can sort of slow things down. So it's a real mix of things, and it's sort of it's not just a kind of like, oh, that show's just gone everywhere all of a sudden. It takes time. A lot of, you know, there obviously shows go all over the world, and a lot of shows do travel everywhere, but it takes time.
Interesting. And this is an obvious one, but I had to ask, has there ever been a project you passed on that later became a huge hit? I'm sure that never happened to you, Noel, of course.
Yeah, but I don't worry about it, you know, because it's
no, of course. But what, just out of interest, what was?
Yeah, no,
what was
tons of things, you know, like everything that's on there, you know, sort of, you know, because you name a show, and I've probably, like, certainly in the UK, and I'm like, oh no, I read that, you know, I loved it, but we didn't do it for this reason or that reason. And often the time it's commercial, like we don't need it, or we felt the gap, the investment required was too big. We didn't want to take that risk on that type of show. There are shows that I'd love to have sold, just seeing how, knowing what they were, and I'm really into like long running shows, because that's where you can really, from a commercial point of view, that you can see a real return when things travel and like run for like 12 seasons, and you know that it commercially can be very attractive, selling big catalogs like that. So when I've seen like successful shows returning season after season, you know, I don't ever go, oh damn it, that's the one that got away. I'm just go, oh god, I've got good instincts, because I thought that would be a good one to do, and good for them for doing it. You know what I mean? It's sort of, there's always just something else to get on with.
Okay, and what separates a great script from a sellable one? I mean, you sort of touched on it earlier with sort of structure and how it's put together, but yeah, what makes a great script from a sellable one?
It's really kind of,
or what separates it? Sorry.
Yeah, basic kind of elements. It's, you know, it's genre can definitely, you know, certain genres can be fantastic, personally speaking, but are tougher to sell. So I've mentioned, you know, I mentioned sci-fi, I've mentioned period, I mentioned Western, which is period, historical. One that can be wonderful scripts and really gripping, but you're like, you know, it's going to be so expensive, it's going to be, you know, difficult to produce. It's like, and we know people, some buyers around the world can be very find genre very difficult for their services, you know, because a lot of these, you know, the places are looking for popular, slightly more broader, get the most eyeballs type of entertainment. Universality, I'd say, is there's some element to a script which can often be quite abstract, but then it could be very specific, a story, but it has a universality to it that feels really strong, you know, that you feel it's not a domestic story, it's just in the way it's been written, it actually has sort of developed, it speaks to everybody, and that's one of the elements that it's difficult to pinpoint where it is in the actual script. It's a feeling and a sort of the way it's been written, but I'd say universality and genre are probably two of the bigger points.
Okay, and now going to sort of strategy, trends, and the future. What is the biggest shift happening in international TV right now?
Well, everything's slowed down. You know, I think that's, you know, everybody across the board, and not just in TV, but in media generally, is grappling with a sort of a slowdown linked to a declining ad market, linked to high production value, high production costs that are making TV programs hard to fund, not impossible to fund sometimes. So I think everyone's the biggest shift is that people have just slowed down. There is still TV being made, there is still TV being watched. I think it's just harder on every level to get those pieces to marry. They are still marrying, but it takes a lot more work and a lot more time. And that, I'd say that's the biggest shift, because we've come from 4 years ago where so much was going on. There was just like people commissioning stuff left, right, and center. There was just like and that's really slowed down now, and people are really working hard to get projects made.
Okay. And which genres feel hot right now, and which have clearly cooled off?
Romance.
Romance is hot again.
Now.
Yeah,
I'd say so. Well, if I look at what's out there, like I've just mentioned Heated Rivalry, but if we think about Rivals, if we think about,
which I thought was excellent, by the way, I love that.
Emily in Paris, I know these are streaming shows.
She looks really ill. My wife's always watching it, and I feel sorry for her at the moment. She looks really unwell. She's always, the show's been so successful, clearly. But yeah,
all the press. But Bridgerton, and you think about those, that female skewing, all the Hunting Wives, even, it's got a sort of novelistic, like sort of airport page turner vibe to it. We've got Woman of Substance coming up on Channel 4 soon. Again, these 80s bonkbusters, as they were, big sagas that it's like, that seems to be like, seem to be leaning into this kind of big romantic world, big story,
Safe stuff.
It's safe, but it's meaty at the same time. It's like big. It's big locations. It's big money. It's big emotions. Yeah. It's sort of. It might be cheeky. Like Rivals is obviously quite cheeky. It's quite saucy.
Rivals was amazing. I was really impressed with that.
But it's sort of. It's big. So I'd say that's a good one amongst all the other genres that always do well. Clearly there were quite a few kind of romantic kind of vibes at the moment.
Okay, and how we're not going to talk about it too much, actually. It's just got it one in here, but how is AI starting to influence development, acquisitions, or evaluation, if at all? How have you noticed it creeping in?
I noticed it creeping in, talking about it a lot.
Yes.
And it is definitely a thing I wouldn't say from a development point of view, I'm probably the wrong person to talk about on the development side, but certainly when you're dealing with companies that have large catalogs and a lot of data in terms of past performance of things, AI, there are undoubtedly models that AI can be sort of trained in to help give comparisons and forecast comparisons or genre sort of similarities that helps you make quicker informed decisions on things. I haven't seen those models yet, and certainly I wasn't using them when, in my latter life. But we will be, so there's, and they'll be hugely useful, sort of in terms of getting information rather than individually having to sift through title by title, performance, how it's done, and all that sort of thing. You can actually just a click of a switch or a prompt click, you can get that information. And so on an operational level, to be very useful, but I don't think it stops people just making real judgment calls and kind of I can't see us trusting AI to make the acquisition decision anytime soon.
Okay, and so this is for every producer trying to understand how to make it work, how producers get a yes. So what makes a pitch stand out to you what makes a pitch stand out immediately for you? Are there any obvious things?
Clarity, like the initial paragraph that's pitched to me, it's got a real sense of what that show is and how it's, what the story is, how it's conceived, and you immediately go, oh right, okay, you know, sort of, and it could be a variety of different things, but there's a clarity to it that you go, that's intriguing, you know, and I want to know more. Other than that, you know, it's sort of just the work that's been done in the project. You know, that there's a Bible that's thought through. There's a clear sense of beginning, middle, and an end that really kind of has a pace to it and is clear. And it's not just, a lot of things seem to just rely on a central. Well, I've seen a lot of things that like rely on a concept that might be good, but they rely so much on the concept that they're kind of they're not spending the time digging beneath that to make sure the elements are smoothly put together and that it's convincing enough and that it keeps taking you places that are interesting and dynamic enough. So yeah, I think, you know, the things that, like you do if you were watching a TV show, if when it starts, you want to be hooked straight away. So it's the same with the pitch. I want that pitch to be like so clear and confident that you're like, oh God, I want to know more. I want to know more. That's such a great idea. I want to see how it develops, rather than something more opaque and maybe you have to dig harder and try harder.
Okay. And what materials matter most when you are evaluating a project?
Well, I kind of mentioned it. I mean, generally speaking, if I'm talking with my acquisitions hat on, it's usually a Bible and a 10-page sort of series overview if it's a series, and a script. Usually you can't do anything without a script, and it's usually a script that's been through quite a few versions. It's not a first draft at all. It's, you know, it's ready to be presented, and it's all the questions can be answered. And there's a clear idea of finance plan, and there's a clear idea of feasibility, production-wise. So they're the things that help get a better, more informed decision, because they're the questions I'm going to be asking. You know, it's not just a creative. It's going to be, it starts with the creative, but then you get into, well, how much is it going to cost? Who's going to do it? Like, where are you doing it? You know, do you trust these people to, you know?
It needs to have done the rounds before it hits you, basically.
It doesn't have to have been. I mean, I like that to be a broadcaster if we're really wanting to get into the numbers, but there needs to be a buy from somebody. But it just needs to be thought through. You know, it's not just, oh, I've got this idea. You know, we don't know what we're going to do with it. What do you think? You know, that's a conversation. You know, they can land, but they take longer, and they kind of, you know, the odds are. It's, you know, the odds stacked against them. If it's just an idea, it's like, okay, well, do we want to put that on our slate and work on it? But it's a different type of project now.
And what red flags kill a project instantly?
Just like, this sounds terrible. Over ambition, maybe, you know, just sort of like, you know, it's great. I really want to bring this world to life, often like a period or a you know, it's a fictional world, and you see it and you're like, that's not fundable. You know what I mean? It's just like, off you go to Netflix. You know what I mean? Go and pitch it to them, see if, because they obviously will do what they want, and it's But so for me, what would kill it is just like over ambition, that this is not fundable in the way the model we're using. It could be brilliant, but it's just like, there's too much. It's to be done well, it will need too much, and to do it cheaply will not serve the material.
And if you were a producer with a brilliant script today, how would you package it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it's so hard. I'd just be thinking all the time about, before you even go into a room to pitch it to your first port of call. So let's say, assume it's the buyer, the broadcaster. Like, just think you've got one chance to do it, and how am I presenting it to its best possible sort of degree? That could include who's in the room with you, you know, and like, do I need to partner up with another producer who maybe has, you know, dare I say, better credentials than you, or more, or, you know, is more favored by that buyer? or can help pull you a piece of talent in because they're more sort of, they have leverage with the agents that, you know, you don't have, and you just got to be realistic. Some people do, and some people don't have that sort of leverage. So it's just thinking like, what's my sales strategy here, and what's the best way of getting the ideal position, and am I willing to commercially sort of sacrifice something to get that? So I just be thinking all the time like about strategy. Don't just be thinking this is great, I'm going to send it to everybody and that's done. It's always it's like, you know, stop strategizing about how you're actually getting it in front of people and how that is coming across before the project's even been pitched. It's like, do we look for real, you know?
Yeah. All right. So moving on to career reflections. Which job taught you the most about people?
I think every job I've done, like, because I've worked internationally, so it's sort of, and it's taught me so much about working with people in terms the different nationalities and different ways of dealing with certain types. Different nationalities have certain ways of behaving that, you know, you have to be open to and allow for, and might not be the same as. So I think it's just the world of international. It just provides me with an open-mindedness that, you know, I don't know whether I would have had it. Yeah, we don't behave in, you know, we have completely. Our own tastes, and it's like, well, the Norwegians are completely different, and the French like certain things, and they also react in a different way when, you know, and they'll argue whether they like something or not in a different way, in the same way that, you know, the Germans will, or the Australians will, or whatever, and the Americans certainly. So just like understanding who you're talking, that, you know, that's kind of really, I've really been taught like to understand, okay, we're going to the room with, you know, an American network, right? We have to do this. It's going to be like this, you know, we have to kind of, and that's not a personal thing. It's just, this is the way they do it here. This is the way, and just like having that open-mindedness to kind of adapt.
Good. All right. And what was the most stressful deal you ever closed, and what did it teach you?
I don't think I can talk specifics on a deal. That's probably not allowed.
Right.
Just sort of like, you know, like.
But did you learn something? What was it? Maybe you can't be specific, but what did it teach you at least? Can you share any of that?
Everything for me is a teaching, because it's, you know, I'm probably my own worst critic as well. You know, never kind of. There's always something you feel like you could do better. You know, you could have. There's always that bit. Well, certainly when I was a salesperson, just at the point you're about to sign, something will come up and you have to give something, or, you know, at the last minute that you wish, oh God, why did I do that? You know, well, it's stressful, but I think there was an element like back in the day where I wish I'd kind of like understanding the data of what you've got. You know what I mean? I think that's, I've seen the evolution of sales and distribution much more over the last 20 years of how much now data is used in programming and in selling. Just like when something is successful here and you're trying to sell it around the world, understanding who's watching it, like minutely, you know, sort of understanding the age groups and when they're watching it, and, you know, and using that to then kind of formulate your strategy, which sounds like a no-brainer now, but I don't know, maybe we didn't have the metrics back in the day, but it just like, you know, so not just removing that sort of personal gut feel of like, oh, it's good, this, you should watch it, you should buy it, and actually rigorously being supported by data and kind of, you know, hard data that you can use. That's one of, so it's not so much answering your question about stress, but it is something I've gradually been taught through my career, just like how important data is, which actually feels like it merges quite nicely into your world, because like the ad world's all about data, isn't it? And it's all about kind of metrics and whatnot,
understanding a demographic and all. Absolutely. We just haven't had the opportunity since, I mean, it's been streamers, it feels like. I'm imagining iPlayer was the same, but when that first came out, but you've not been you've never had it before. It just didn't exist before, did it? Where they could sort of tell how many. It was very basic though, wasn't it? You used to be able to tell how many people were watching, a number, but nothing more specific than that. Whereas now everyone's got their own. I mean, it's amazing, especially with mobile.
No, we can really see like detailed information about who's watching, and that is so useful when it comes to convincing someone to buy something, because even if they don't like it, you can say, but I know this is going to resonate with your audience because it's X and the people that were watching it are X, so there's like a real strong argument this is going to work for you. And so yeah, it just adds another really rich dynamic to the whole process. And it's the same principle as ads, isn't it? Because it's about just finding that audience, and it's just getting eyeballs onto the content, and it's making sure that, I think this is where things converge even more now. It's just that sense of like audience and getting those eyeballs, and sort of and the more information we've got to do that is really helpful.
But also, I mean, they're talking about when people are picking up on something and when they're not. As in when people are turning it off,
when they turned it off,
and when they're not. And you can now. I've been reading, people have been showing on seasons when shows, the storyline is people are watching, and when certain different characters elicit a different response. Yeah, and so they're being rewritten into the storylines changing based upon the actual data itself, which I think we'll see more and more of.
Yeah, and I think also we're seeing formats change because of that as well, aren't we? Like sort of 20-minute dramas or 20-minute episodes, sort of because 10-minute, because people are like, oh no, they're not so much their attention span. They're not. Yeah, they just got something else. Something else will come up that they have to do. So, but that's kind of what's cool and interesting about where we are right now. Is that like the really kind of the old rules are gone in terms of those little slots that you have to fill, and it's sort of you can do everything these days.
But my next question was literally what still excites you about this industry, but I guess you sort of already answered it. It's still going. It's still exciting.
What still excites me is when I get, what was that the other day? I kind of like when people pitch me about, tell them like if I read a script or they tell me about what they're working on, and you feel that tingle of like, oh my God, that's such a good idea. I really like, tell me more. Even if I'm not like remotely involved or could be involved, I still love hearing an exciting project being pitched, and it's that first exposure to it. Really, it's like a hit of drugs. It's just like like, oh my God. Then you get into the nitty gritty and kind of work takes over. But when you first hear it, that still excites me. What's exciting me at the moment is just like the possibilities that we're facing. The kind of I say just the way necessity is bringing different parties, different companies, different areas together, whether it's branded entertainment or whether it's shorter formats or whether it's sort of podcasts becoming TV shows. I love that what I found exciting is that entertainment is changing its definition. It's sort of what we used to think of as television as being a half-hour or an hour-long program can be anything, as long as people enjoy it and they feel that, they're getting something from it storytelling wise, and that doesn't need to be scripted, but then it's entertainment. And I that's exciting because it can in so many different directions, and it's kind of
there's no gatekeepers anymore. You can publish yourself immediately. Like there's still you're absolutely right, there are plenty of gatekeepers, but it is fewer, and there's much more it's much easier to produce content now in lots of ways. Like it's more expensive than ever to shoot traditional content in lots of ways, but it's cheaper than ever to do this.
I think I think there's that practical element of there's so much energy around getting it to the audience. There's a can-do attitude that is fantastic that the old guard of television don't understand. I think we can't have one without the other, and going forward, you've got to listen to the people everyone's got to listen to each other basically, because sort of the old sort of traditional methods of making television and how those things are told, how they're structured, and even how they're produced. There's a reason they were successful for all that time and still are successful. So it's not about, you cannot ignore that, and certainly from a from storytelling point of view, whether it's a two-handed conversation podcast that's being filmed or whether it's an intricate drama, it's all storytelling. It's just knowing how that story is told in a really sort of accessible and entertaining, like, quality way. That's they're the sort of unsaid skills that are kind of really important to carry over. It's not just about shoot and publish, otherwise it'll just, it's just not going to be as sort of, not going to have the longevity, I don't think. We've still got to have that kind of quality weave through everything.
Okay, and then finally, just a quick fire now, Noel, because I'm mindful of time. Script or talent?
Starts with the script, I would say.
Okay.
If you're really talking, I just have one word answer. Okay.
Okay, and broadcaster or streamer?
Doesn't matter.
Okay. Most underrated international market?
All right, I'm going to say Australia. I think they're doing some amazing things that we don't see half of, and not just in scripted, but in film and we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. There's so much really great stuff out there. Interesting.
A show you wish you had acquired?
Like something like Yellowstone or something like that.
Yeah. Is the so-called golden age?
Shock. I wish I'd acquired massively successful TV show.
Well, still, I get it. Is the so-called golden age of TV over? Yes or no?
I say yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say yes, because it's slowed down, but it's not over. We're not. TV is not over. Yeah, it's not
changing into a new way. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, that's the end of it. It's Noel. Thank you so much. This has been a brilliant insight into how the global TV business actually works behind the scenes. For anyone listening who is developing scripted projects, looking for partners, or trying to understand how international deals really come together, this is Ron to Rewind. This episode of AdBits was supported by 2.0 Film. If you have any commercial bids coming up, we service productions across Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Northern Italy, and Austria with fast turnarounds, top crews, and stunning locations. Thanks for listening. And again, thanks so much, Noel.
Thank you.